The most dangerous ambushes don't happen in the dark. They happen in the brightest of spotlights, with millions watching. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was running like clockwork that Tuesday evening. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, knowing that Chris Rock was scheduled to appear as the main guest. Rock had been making the rounds promoting his latest comedy special, and everyone expected the usual banter between two comedy legends. The cameras were rolling. The audience was warmed up, and Colbert sat behind his desk with that familiar smirk that his fans had come to love. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes, something calculating. Chris Rock walked out to thunderous applause, his signature swagger evident as he waved to the crowd. He looked relaxed, comfortable, ready for what he assumed would be a typical late-night chat. The two men shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and Rock settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket and flashing that million-dollar smile that had made him one of the most recognizable faces in comedy. "Chris Rock, everybody," Colbert announced to the audience, his voice carrying that theatrical tone he'd perfected over the years. "Thank you for being here, Chris. I have to say I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time." Rock nodded, still smiling. "Always good to be here, Stephen. Thanks for having me on." But then Colbert's expression shifted subtly, and anyone paying close attention might have noticed the change. His smile became more rigid, more forced, and when he looked down at his note cards, there was a deliberate pause that felt loaded with intention. "So, Chris, let's dive right in." Colbert began, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I want to talk about your recent comments regarding the comedy industry, and specifically your thoughts on accountability in entertainment." Rock's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the direction he'd expected the interview to take, but he was a professional. "Well, Stephen, comedy has always been about pushing boundaries, about making people think while they laugh. I've always believed that comedians have a responsibility to be honest, even when that honesty makes people uncomfortable." Colbert leaned forward, and there was something predatory in his posture. "Interesting that you mentioned responsibility, Chris, because I've been doing some research, and I found some old clips of your stand-up routines from the early 2000s that I think our audience would find very enlightening." The audience murmured, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Rock's smile faltered for just a moment, but he maintained his composure. "Oh really? Well, I've been doing this for over 30 years, Stephen. I'm sure there's plenty of material out there that might seem different through today's lens." "Different is one way to put it," Colbert replied, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "But before we get to that, let me ask you this. Do you think there should be consequences when public figures, especially comedians, cross certain lines?" Rock shifted in his chair, sensing that this wasn't going to be the friendly interview he'd anticipated. "Look, Stephen, I think context matters. Comedy is about timing, about the moment, about connecting with an audience in real time. Taking bits out of context, especially from decades ago, doesn't really serve anyone." Colbert's laugh was cold, calculated. "Context, right? Well, let's provide some context, then." He turned to face the camera, directly addressing his audience with theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is Chris Rock in his own words from a performance in 2003. The monitors around the studio lit up, and suddenly, grainy footage of a much younger Chris Rock appeared on screen. The clip had been carefully edited, stripped of its surrounding context, presenting only the most controversial moments from what had originally been a longer, more nuanced bit about relationships and social dynamics. The audience watched in uncomfortable silence as the edited version played, making Rock's words seem far more inflammatory than they had been in their original context. Rock's face went from confusion to anger as he realized what was happening. "Stephen, what the hell is this? You're taking that completely out of context. That was part of a 45-minute set about the complexities of modern relationships, and you're showing 30 seconds that make it look like something entirely different." Colbert turned back to Rock with mock innocence. "I'm simply showing our audience what you said, Chris. These are your words, are they not?" "My words, yes, but not my intent, and you damn well know it." Rock shot back, his voice rising. "This is exactly the kind of gotcha journalism that's destroying honest conversation in this country. You invited me here under false pretenses." The audience was dead silent now, the tension in the studio thick enough to cut with a knife. Colbert, however, seemed to be enjoying himself. "False pretenses? Chris, I simply wanted to have an honest conversation about accountability. Isn't that what you're always advocating for in your comedy? Honesty." Rock stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't you dare lecture me about honesty, Stephen. You sit here every night behind this desk pretending to be some moral authority, but what you just did is manipulative and dishonest. You ambushed me with edited footage to make some kind of point, and that's not honest. That's character assassination. Colbert remained seated, his composure intact, which only seemed to infuriate Rock further. I think you're overreacting, Chris. I'm simply asking you to address your past statements. Isn't that fair? Fair? Rock's voice cracked with incredulity. You think it's fair to invite someone onto your show and then sandbag them with edited clips taken completely out of context? You think it's fair to try to destroy someone's reputation for your own entertainment? The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the escalating confrontation. Colbert's producers were likely having heart attacks in the control room, but Colbert himself seemed completely in control, as if this had all been planned from the beginning. Chris, I think you need to calm down, Colbert said with infuriating condescension. This is exactly the kind of reaction that makes people question whether you can handle being held accountable for your words. That was the breaking point. Rock's face contorted with rage, and he took a step toward Colbert's desk. Accountable? You want to talk about accountability? How about you be accountable for what you just did? How about you be accountable for lying to me and my team about what this interview was going to be about? The security team was starting to move, sensing that the situation was spiraling out of control. But Rock wasn't finished. You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business long enough to recognize a setup when I see one. And this whole thing stinks. You didn't invite me here to have a conversation. You invited me here to humiliate me. And I'm not going to sit here and let you do it. Colbert finally stood up, his mask of civility slipping slightly. Chris, I think you're being paranoid. This is simply journalism. This is simply asking tough questions. Journalism? Rock laughed bitterly. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job, and you know it. Real journalists provide context. Real journalists ask fair questions. Real journalists don't edit footage to make their guests look bad. What you did here tonight is the opposite of journalism. The audience was completely silent now, unsure of how to react to the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed riveted by the drama, but everyone could sense that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Colbert's voice took on a sharper edge, his facade of reasonableness finally cracking. You know what, Chris? Maybe the problem isn't the questions I'm asking. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being challenged on your past statements. Maybe the problem is that you think you should be immune from criticism just because you're Chris Rock. Rock stared at Colbert for a long moment, his chest heaving with anger and frustration. You really want to do this, Stephen? You really want to turn this into something ugly? Because I can play that game too. But I don't think you want me to. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Colbert's eyes narrowed as he processed what Rock had just said. And for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely unsettled, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. Oh, I absolutely want you to, Chris. Colbert replied, his voice dripping with false bravado. Please enlighten us all. What exactly are you threatening me with? Rock took a step closer to the desk, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than his earlier shouting. I'm not threatening you, Stephen. I'm giving you a chance to end this charade with whatever dignity you have left. Because if you want to play dirty, I know things about this industry, about this network, about you that would make your little edited clips look like child's play. The color drained from Colbert's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. Are you trying to intimidate me on my own show, Chris? Because that's exactly the kind of behavior that validates everything I've been saying about you. Intimidate. Rock laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stephen, I don't need to intimidate you. The truth is intimidating enough. Should I tell your audience about the Christmas party incident in 2019? Should I tell them about how you treated your female writers during contract negotiations last year? Or maybe we should discuss your little arrangement with certain network executives. Colbert's professional mask was cracking rapidly. Now, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I think you're having some kind of breakdown. Breakdown? Rock's voice rose again. The only thing breaking down here is your little performance, Stephen. You thought you could bring me on here, ambush me with edited footage, and I'd just sit there and take it like some rookie comedian grateful for the exposure. You picked the wrong guy. The studio audience was completely transfixed now. Some people literally on the edge of their seats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public execution, and no one could look away. Colbert tried to regain control of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for Mr. Rock's outburst. I think it's clear that he's unable to handle legitimate questions about his past statements. Legitimate questions? Rock whirled around to face the audience directly. Folks, let me tell you what legitimate questions look like. A legitimate question would be, Stephen, why did you edit that footage to remove the context that explained I was doing a character bit about societal double standards? A legitimate question would be, Stephen, why didn't you show the part where I explicitly said I was playing devil's advocate to make a point about how ridiculous those attitudes are? He turned back to Colbert, his anger reaching a new level. But you didn't want to ask legitimate questions, did you? You wanted to create a moment. You wanted to go viral. You wanted to destroy someone to boost your own ratings. Colbert's response revealed just how calculated this whole thing had been. Chris, the entertainment industry is changing, and people who can't adapt need to be held accountable. Your comedy has always pushed boundaries, but some boundaries shouldn't be pushed. And who made you the judge of that, Stephen? Rock shot back. Who gave you the authority to decide which boundaries are acceptable and which aren't? You sit here every night making jokes about politicians, about public figures, about anyone who disagrees with your worldview, but suddenly you're the moral police. The hypocrisy was becoming more apparent with every exchange. Colbert's own comedy was built on mockery and ridicule. Yet here he was, positioning himself as some kind of ethical authority. I think there's a difference between political commentary and the kind of material you were doing in that clip, Colbert replied, his voice getting tighter. Political commentary? Rock's laugh was harsh and bitter. Stephen, half your show is you making fun of people's appearances, their accents, their personal lives. You've built a career on mockery, but now you want to lecture me about crossing lines? The audience began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with Rock's points. They were starting to see through Colbert's facade, starting to understand that this wasn't about accountability at all. Colbert sensed he was losing the room and tried a different approach. Chris, I think you're deflecting from the real issue here, which is your inability to take responsibility for problematic content. Problematic according to who? Rock demanded. According to you? According to some focus group? According to social media mobs who didn't even watch the full performance. He gestured toward the monitors. You showed 30 seconds of a 45-minute set and presented it as if that was the entire message. That's not accountability. That's manipulation. I showed your actual words, Chris. You showed my words stripped of their meaning, their context, their purpose. Rock countered. It's like showing someone saying, I hate puppies from a longer sentence that was, I hate puppies being abused. You've deliberately misrepresented what I said to serve your own agenda. Colbert was getting desperate now, his carefully planned ambush falling apart. I think our audience is smart enough to understand what they heard. Your audience is smart enough to understand manipulation when they see it. Rock replied, turning to face the crowd again. And they're seeing it right now. They're seeing a host who invited a guest under false pretenses, who edited footage to misrepresent that guest's words, and who is now trying to gaslight everyone into believing this is legitimate journalism. The energy in the room was shifting dramatically. What had started as Colbert's attempt to publicly shame Rock was backfiring spectacularly. The audience was no longer on Colbert's side. They were starting to see him as the villain in this scenario. Chris, I think you need to leave, Colbert said, his voice shaking slightly. Oh, I'm leaving, Rock replied, his voice filled with disgust. But not because you're kicking me off. I'm leaving because I refuse to participate in this farce any longer. He started walking toward the exit, then turned back one final time. You know what's really sad about this, Stephen? You used to be funny. You used to understand that comedy was about bringing people together, about finding truth through humor. Now you're just another angry man with a platform tearing people down to make yourself feel important. Colbert's face was red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Security, please escort Mr. Rock out. I don't need an escort, Rock said, his dignity intact. Despite everything that had happened, I know the way out. Unlike you, I still have my self-respect. The studio fell into stunned silence as Rock walked toward the exit, his head held high despite the character assassination attempt he just endured. But he wasn't quite finished. At the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time. Stephen, when this airs, people are going to see exactly who you really are, and that's not my fault. That's yours. Those words hit Colbert like a physical blow. The smugness that had carried him through the first half of this disaster completely evaporated, replaced by something much uglier. You know what, Chris? Colbert called out, his voice cracking with desperation. Don't you dare walk away from me like you're some kind of victim here. You're not the victim, you're the problem. Rock stopped dead in his tracks. The audience collectively held its breath. Excuse me? Rock turned around slowly, his voice deadly quiet. Colbert was standing now, gripping the edge of his desk. You waltz in here with your attitude, acting like you're untouchable, like the rules don't apply to you. Well, Stephen, the rules do apply to me, Rock said, his voice gaining strength. But they also apply to you. And you just broke every single one of them. You broke the rule of journalistic integrity. You broke the rule of common decency. And you broke the rule of not being a complete and utter hypocrite. Colbert lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. You think you're so smart, don't you, Rock? You think you're above all this? No, Stephen, I don't think I'm above it, Rock replied, his voice calm and measured. I just think I'm better than it. And so are the millions of people who watch your show every night, hoping for a laugh, hoping for some genuine entertainment, and instead they get this. They get you, tearing down another human being for ratings. The security guards finally reached Rock, gently but firmly taking his arms. He didn't resist. He simply kept his gaze fixed on Colbert, a look of profound disappointment on his face. You know, Stephen, Rock said, his voice echoing through the silent studio, I used to respect you. I used to think you were one of the good ones. But tonight, you showed your true colors. And they're not very funny. With that, Chris Rock allowed himself to be escorted off the stage, leaving Stephen Colbert standing alone, exposed, and utterly defeated in the harsh glare of the studio lights. The audience remained silent, the applause that had greeted Rock's entrance, now a distant memory, replaced by the chilling realization of what they had just witnessed. The show went to an unplanned commercial break, leaving the audience and millions of viewers at home to ponder the raw, unscripted drama that had just unfolded. The ambush had failed, and in its wake, it left a late-night legend tarnished, and a comedian's integrity shining brighter than ever. What do you think about Chris Rock's explosive interview? Was he right to call out Stephen Colbert, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see more raw, unfiltered celebrity moments and deep dives into the entertainment world, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. And check out our playlist of the most controversial celebrity interviews that shook the internet.